What if the most resilient seed on Earth has been sitting in someone's old mason jar for the past 50 years, and almost nobody knew to look for it? Welcome back to Roots and Garden Secrets. I am your host, and after more than 30 years of growing things in dry soil under punishing summer heat, I thought I had seen just about every plant worth knowing. Then one afternoon, a neighbor handed me a small cloth bag filled with tiny, pale seeds and said, "Try these. No instructions, no label, just seeds." That was my first encounter with the tepary bean, and I will be honest with you, I almost did not bother. They looked ordinary. But what happened in my garden that summer changed the way I think about growing food entirely. This bean thrives where most crops give up. It asks for very little water, builds the soil it grows in, and produces a harvest that can feed a family through the leanest months. It has a history stretching back 5,000 years, and a story that every gardener in America deserves to hear. So if you are new here, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Let us dig in together. To truly understand why this bean matters, you have to go back a long time, not decades, thousands of years. The tepary bean was first cultivated in the Sonoran Desert, the harsh, sun-baked landscape stretching across what is now southern Arizona and northern New Mexico. Archaeological evidence shows that people were storing and eating these seeds at least 5,000 years ago. And here is something that does not get talked about enough. This was not a wild plant that people simply happened to eat. It was deliberately domesticated, carefully selected from wild populations already growing in the desert, and refined across countless generations into a crop perfectly suited to that brutal environment. The people who did this work understood something that modern plant breeders are only now beginning to fully appreciate. You do not improve a plant by fighting its nature. You improve it by understanding what it already knows how to do. But here is what stops me every time I think about it. They were not just eating them. They were selecting them, saving them, and passing them forward with intention, generation after generation. I want you to picture a woman named Elder Martha. She is not a character I invented entirely. She represents the real seed keepers I have learned about through years of research and conversations with people connected to this land. Elder Martha kept her tepary seeds in clay jars, sealed with dried grass. She knew which variety to plant near the wash after a summer storm, and which one to save for a ceremony. That knowledge was never written in a book. It lived in her hands, her memory, and the stories she told while sorting seeds by firelight. The farming system these communities used was called akchin, a word tied to the place where floodwater spreads across flat desert ground and soaks into the sand. When the summer monsoon broke over the mountains, farmers guided that rushing water through hand-built channels of earth and stone. The flood might last only a few hours, but the soil held just enough moisture for tepary beans to germinate, grow, flower, and set seed before the desert dried out again. No deep wells, no irrigation pipes, no electricity, just an intimate understanding of how water moves through land. What I find remarkable as a gardener is that they were reading the natural world the way I read a weather app: the color of the evening sky, the direction of the wind, the behavior of birds near the wash. These were the signals that told them when to plant. There were 8 distinct tepary varieties within these communities. The white seeds were compared to stars scattered across the Milky Way, a symbol of abundance born from scarcity. The brown seeds fed families through ordinary days. Each jar of seeds held a name, a flavor, a memory, and a strategy for surviving the next dry year. The lesson these farmers lived by was simple and profound. They did not conquer the desert, they listened to it. And that, my fellow gardeners, is a mindset worth carrying into our own backyards today. But knowing this history also means sitting with a harder truth. Because everything I just described nearly disappeared. Not slowly, not quietly. Within a single generation, one of the most resilient food systems ever developed on American soil was pushed to the edge of extinction. It started with policy. Land allotment laws in the late 1800s broke apart the communal territories that akchin farming depended on. That system only worked when an entire community cooperated, building channels together, reading the land together, harvesting together. When the land was divided into individual parcels, the collective knowledge that held the whole thing together began to unravel. Then came the 1950s. Federal food assistance programs began distributing white flour, canned goods, lard, and processed sugar to native communities across the Southwest. The intention was to help. The result, over time, was the quiet erasure of a diet that had sustained people through centuries of desert living. Traditional seeds stopped being planted because there was no longer a reason to plant them. And when seeds stop being planted, the knowledge of how to grow them fades with them. Industrial agriculture finished what policy started. Tepary beans simply did not cooperate with machines. Their pods ripened at different times, which meant mechanical harvesters could not collect them efficiently without losing a significant portion of the crop. In a system built around speed, uniformity, and scale that made the tepary bean commercially inconvenient, so it was quietly set aside. And yet, the seed survived. I think about a man like James Walker, an elderly farmer who kept glass jars of tepary seeds in his back storage room for 40 years. Nobody asked about them. Nobody seemed to care. Until a drought came, and suddenly people started looking for crops that could handle the heat. That is where the revival began. Organizations like Native Seeds and Search in Tucson, Arizona, now preserve more than 40 distinct tepary bean varieties. Younger growers are returning to the fields, learning from their grandparents what no agriculture textbook ever recorded. Each row of beans planted today is more than a garden choice. It is a reclamation, because every jar of seeds that survived was never just food. It was language. It was history. It was a survival strategy sealed and waiting for the right moment to be opened again. Now let me get into the part I know many of you have been waiting for. Because understanding the history of this bean is one thing, actually growing it in your own backyard is something else entirely. And I want to save you from making the same mistake I did the first time. When I planted my first row of tepary beans, I treated them exactly like I would treat any other bean in my garden. I watered them every other day, kept the soil consistently moist, and felt pretty good about myself. Within 2 weeks, half the row had yellowed and collapsed. I had essentially drowned a desert plant. That was a humbling morning in the garden, and it taught me the single most important rule of growing tepary beans. This plant is not like anything else you have grown before. Respect that from day one. So let me walk you through what actually works. First, choosing your variety. If you are just starting out, I recommend either the brown tepary or the traditional white tepary. Both are forgiving for beginners and reliable producers. You can order seeds from Native Seeds and Search, based in Tucson, Arizona, or look for heirloom seed shops that carry southwestern varieties. Avoid generic garden center seeds. You want the real thing. Second, timing your planting. Do not rush this. Tepary beans need warm soil, and I mean genuinely warm, at least 65 degrees Fahrenheit before you put a single seed in the ground. That usually means late May through early June for most parts of the country. Planting too early in cool soil will rot your seeds before they ever sprout. Unlike green beans or snap beans that can go in earlier, tepary beans need summer heat from the very beginning. Third, prepare your soil properly. Drainage is everything. If your soil stays wet after rain for more than a day, you need to fix that before planting. Work in coarse sand or perlite to open up heavy clay soil. The goal is a bed that drains freely and dries out between waterings. Fourth, always direct sow your seeds. Do not start tepary beans in trays or pots. They develop a deep taproot early on, and transplanting disrupts that root severely. Push each seed about 1 to 1.5 inches into the soil, space them 4 to 6 inches apart in the row, and give rows about 18 to 24 inches between them. Now here is the golden rule of watering tepary beans, and please remember this. Water deeply but infrequently. Soak the soil down 6 to 8 inches, then walk away and let the surface dry out completely before you water again. In hot, dry conditions, that might mean watering once every 10 to 14 days once the plants are established. I know that feels wrong if you are used to babying your garden, but this plant rewards restraint, not attention. On fertilizing, keep it simple. Tepary beans fix their own nitrogen through bacteria in their roots. Adding high nitrogen fertilizer will push the plant into producing lush foliage instead of pods. At planting time, work in a light application of bone meal or a low nitrogen fertilizer with higher phosphorus and potassium. Then step back and let the plant do its work. Watch for spider mites during hot, dry spells. You will notice tiny yellow speckling on the upper leaf surface and fine webbing underneath. Blast the undersides of leaves with a strong stream of water in the early morning. That handles most infestations without any chemicals at all. For harvest, patience pays off. Wait until 70 to 80% of the pods have turned a cream or tan color. Then pull the entire plant and hang it upside down in a dry, shaded area for 1 to 2 weeks. Once fully dry, lay the plants on a tarp and thresh them by walking over them gently. Winnow out the chaff and you have your harvest. Save your seeds in sealed glass jars with a small silica gel packet inside. Stored this way, tepary bean seeds can remain viable for 5 to 10 years. That is not just a gardening tip. That is how Elder Martha's seeds survived long enough to reach us today. And if you want to take things a step further, try planting tepary beans as part of a Three Sisters combination with corn and squash. The corn gives the beans a natural trellis, the beans feed nitrogen back into the soil, and the squash leaves shade the ground and hold moisture. Together, these three plants use significantly less water than growing each one separately. It is an ancient system that works beautifully in a modern backyard. Before I wrap up, I want to spend a moment on something that surprised me the first time I cooked a batch of tepary beans in my own kitchen. Because growing them is one thing. Eating them is where this story becomes personal, in a completely different way. I soaked a cup of dried tepary beans overnight, about 8 hours, then simmered them low and slow for roughly 90 minutes, until they were tender all the way through. The texture is firmer than a black bean or a pinto, with a slightly nutty, earthy flavor that holds up beautifully in soups, stews, and chili. I started using them anywhere I would normally reach for kidney beans or navy beans, and honestly, I have not looked back. What I noticed over time was how satisfied I felt after a meal built around tepary beans. They are dense with plant protein and high in fiber, which means they digest slowly and keep you full for hours. For those of us in our 40s, 50s, and beyond who are paying more attention to what we put in our bodies, this is the kind of food that earns its place on the table, not because of a trend, but because of thousands of years of real-world proof. I am not here to make miracle claims. I am a gardener, not a doctor. But I will say this honestly, few foods I have ever grown have felt as meaningful to eat as this one. And that brings me back to where this story began. Elder Martha sealed her seeds in clay jars so the next generation would have something to plant. James Walker kept his glass jars on a dusty shelf for 40 years, waiting for the world to remember what it had forgotten. They held on so that we would not have to start from nothing. The world keeps searching for the next technological breakthrough to fix our food system. But sometimes the answer has already been found. It was found 5,000 years ago, preserved in a jar, and handed quietly from one generation to the next. This summer, I want to encourage you to plant even just one row of tepary beans in your garden. Then come back down to the comments and tell me how it went. I read every single one. If this story moved you the way it moved me, please subscribe to Roots and Garden Secrets and leave this video a like. We are not just gardeners here. We are keepers of something worth protecting. And the next seed story we uncover together may surprise you even more.